There are moments in life that don't arrive with warnings. They don't shout. They don't knock. They simply happen and leave you quietly rearranged inside. I didn't know that evening would be one of those moments. It began like any other day. Ordinary. Predictable. The kind of day you forget as soon as it ends. Dinner was already on the table, steam rising slowly from plates that had been prepared out of habit rather than excitement. The house was calm, filled with familiar sounds, the ticking of the clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft scrape of cutlery against ceramic. My son sat across from me. He looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in expression. His shoulders carried a tension I had never noticed before. His phone lay beside his plate, lighting up every few seconds, demanding his attention in a way I no longer did. I noticed it, but I said nothing. Silence had slowly become my way of surviving. We ate for a while without speaking. I didn't mind. I had grown used to quiet meals, used to being present without being included. I thought this was just another one of those evenings. I was wrong. My son cleared his throat. Not loudly, not nervously, just enough to announce that something was coming. "Dad," he said. I looked up. "I've been thinking about something," he continued. I nodded, waiting. Thinking had become his favorite habit lately. He thought about work, about money, about responsibility. He thought aloud, often without realizing that not every thought needed an audience. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding bad," he said, pushing his plate slightly away. I offered a small smile. "Just say it. That was my mistake. As much as I care about you," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words, "sometimes it feels like you're a burden." The sentence landed between us. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with enough weight to change everything. A burden. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my ears had heard. I stared at my plate, suddenly aware that the food had gone cold. I hadn't taken a bite in several minutes. He didn't stop. "You're retired now," he continued, his voice calm, almost practical. "You don't really contribute anymore. Medical bills, expenses, even space. It all adds up." There was no anger in his tone. That was the cruelest part. Anger can be forgiven. Logic feels permanent. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain exactly, but pressure. The kind that comes when years of memory rush forward all at once. I thought of mornings when I left the house before sunrise, carrying lunch I barely had time to eat. I thought of nights when I came home exhausted, only to stay awake helping with homework or fixing something that had broken. I thought of weekends I never rested, opportunities one never took, dreams I quietly folded away because someone else needed me more. And now, I was a calculation. I opened my mouth to speak. Then I closed it again. I could have reminded him of everything. I could have defended myself. I could have raised my voice or demanded respect. But when I looked at him, I realized something that stopped me cold. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He had already decided. This wasn't frustration. This was a conclusion. So I stayed silent. I picked up my fork, then set it back down. My silence unsettled him. "I didn't mean it like that," he added quickly, sensing the shift. "I'm just being honest. Honest." That word stayed with me long after he stood up and left the table. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt displaced, like a chair that had been moved to the corner after years of being at the center of the room. The next morning, I woke up early as usual. Old habits don't disappear just because they're no longer appreciated. I made coffee, washed the cup, wiped the counter. The house was quiet. My son walked past me, keys in hand. "Morning," he said casually. "Morning," I replied. Nothing more. Days passed, then weeks, and with them came a slow, painful realization. Conversations became shorter, necessary, functional. Eye contact became rare. Decisions were made without me. Plans were discussed as if I wasn't sitting right there. At family gatherings, I became the quiet one, the listener, the observer. When I spoke, people nodded politely, then moved on as if I hadn't said anything at all. I wasn't invisible. I was transparent. One evening, as I walked back toward my room, I overheard my son on the phone. His voice was low, careful. He didn't know I was close enough to hear. "I don't know how long this can go on," he said. "It's not that I don't care. It's just he needs so much." I stopped walking. Not because I was shocked, because I already understood. I stepped away before he finished the sentence. I didn't need to hear more. The meaning was clear enough. That night, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, clarity. If I was truly a burden in his life, then I needed to stop living like one. Not by arguing, not by begging, not by demanding space that was no longer being offered, but by reclaiming myself. The following days, I changed quietly. I stopped asking for help. If something needed fixing, I fixed it myself. If my back hurt, I rested without complaint. If loneliness crept in, I sat with it instead of reaching out. I began walking every morning. At first, just around the block, then farther. The rhythm of my steps gave my thoughts room to breathe. The air felt different outside, lighter, honest. One afternoon, I started sorting through old papers, documents I hadn't touched in years, files, receipts, letters, pieces of a life I had built long before I was reduced to a word. I found things I had forgotten, a savings account I opened years ago and never mentioned, a small investment I quietly maintained, property papers with my name still clearly printed at the top. I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. I hadn't become dependent. I had simply stopped asserting myself. Silence had allowed others to define me. My son noticed the change. "You've been very quiet lately," he said one evening. "I'm fine," I replied. And I was. That seemed to trouble him more than anger ever could. Weeks passed, then months. People from my past began calling. Old colleagues, former clients. They wanted advice, opinions, guidance. They remember me as someone reliable, someone capable. I helped them quietly, without announcements, without validation. Life began to regain its balance. One night, my son sat across from me at the same table where he had called me a burden. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" I looked at him. "Of course." "How do you manage everything?" he asked. "You seem calm." I met his eyes. "I always have," I said. Something flickered in his expression. Confusion. Doubt. The first crack. But he said nothing, and neither did I, because silence, when chosen, has a way of preparing the ground for truths that haven't arrived yet. And this was only the beginning. The change didn't announce itself. It never does. At first, it appeared in small, almost forgettable ways. The kind of changes people dismiss because they seem temporary. My son began coming home later. Not because he wanted to avoid the house, but because he didn't want to face the quiet waiting inside it. His phone calls became shorter, sharper. Sometimes I could hear him pacing in his room late at night, frustration leaking through the walls in broken sentences and unfinished thoughts. He thought I didn't notice. But when you become quiet, you notice everything. One evening, he came home and dropped his keys on the table harder than he meant to. The sound echoed through the room, louder than it should have been. "Long day?" I asked. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "You could say that." I nodded and returned to my book. He lingered. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they expect engagement. "They're restructuring at work," he said after a moment. "People are being let go. Nothing feels stable anymore." "I see," I replied. That was all. He looked at me, clearly waiting for advice, reassurance, direction. The kind of guidance I had given him his entire life without him ever asking. It didn't come. Not because I wanted to punish him, because he needed to learn what it felt like to stand without leaning. Days passed, and the pressure around him tightened. Bills arrived. Meetings ran late. His confidence, once loud and unshakable, began to fray at the edges. The man who once spoke in certainty now paused before finishing sentences. One afternoon, I found him sitting at the dining table, staring at nothing. The same table, a different silence. "Dad," he said suddenly, without looking up, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. How did you always know what to do?" The question surprised me. "I didn't," I said honestly. "I learned as I went." He frowned. "It always looked easy." I smiled faintly. "That's because you were watching from the safe side." That answer followed him for days. I could see it in the way he began watching me. Not casually, carefully, as if trying to understand when the ground beneath him had shifted and why no longer seemed to sync with it. He noticed my routine, my morning walks, my steady habits, the absence of panic. One afternoon, he followed me into the garage. "You still keep everything organized," he said, looking around. "Disorder makes noise," I replied. "I prefer quiet." In the corner sat an old toolbox, scratched and faded from years of use. "You taught me how to use that," he said. "I taught you patience," I corrected. "The tools were just helpers." He picked up a wrench, turning it slowly in his hands. "I never thanked you for that." "You don't thank someone for doing what they believed was right," I said. He placed the wrench back gently, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. That night, he didn't close his door. The house feels different when doors stay open. As weeks passed, he began doing small things, asking before deciding, listening without interrupting, including me in conversations again, not out of obligation, but confusion, as if he was trying to understand when authority had quietly shifted. "What are you working on these days?" he asked one morning. "Consulting," I replied. His eyebrows rose. "Consulting?" "Yes." "For who?" "People who remember my value." The words weren't sharp, but they landed. That night, the lights in his room stayed on long after midnight. The next morning, he looked older, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "about what I said that night." I waited. "I didn't understand then," he admitted. "I thought responsibility meant controlling things, people, situations. And now," I asked, "and now I feel like I'm losing control of everything." I nodded slowly. "That's how it begins." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean adulthood doesn't arrive with power," I said. "It arrives with weight." He swallowed hard. The weeks that followed humbled him in ways success never had. Work didn't stabilize. Money tightened. Confidence slipped. And for the first time, he didn't look at me as someone who needed managing. He looked at me as someone who had survived. One night, after dinner, he stayed at the table while I stood to leave. "Dad," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I sat back down, not because I needed it, because he needed to say it. "I said something unforgivable," he continued. "I reduced you to a word, a calculation." I didn't interrupt. "I thought you needed me more than I needed you," he said, "and I used that to feel important." There was not cruelty, fear. "I was wrong," he whispered, "and I'm sorry." I looked at him, not as a father looking at a child, but as one adult looking at another. "I never stopped loving you," I said, "but love doesn't survive without respect." Tears filled his eyes. "I see that now," he said. The silence between us felt different this time. Not heavy, honest. From that day, things changed slowly, not dramatically. Real change rarely is. He didn't suddenly become perfect. Neither did I. But the balance shifted. He asked for advice without expecting answers. He listened without preparing a response. He learned to sit with discomfort instead of passing it on. And I learned something too. Silence doesn't erase pain, but it teaches patience. One evening, he asked, "Did you ever feel like giving up on me?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered, "but I did feel invisible." He lowered his head. "I don't want to be the reason someone feels that way again." I believed him. Belief doesn't erase the past. It builds a bridge forward. A few weeks later, he made a serious mistake at work, one that cost him trust. When he told me, he waited for judgment. "What will you do next?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's fine," I said. Not knowing is part of learning. He exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath for days. That was when I realized something important. He wasn't just learning responsibility. He was learning humility. Months passed. He lost comfort. He gained clarity. He learned to cook, to manage his finances carefully, to sit with uncertainty without blaming others. And I learned that being silent doesn't mean being absent. It means allowing others to step into their own lives. One afternoon, while sorting old documents, I found a letter I had written years ago but never sent. It was addressed to him. I read it quietly. It spoke of hope, belief, and forgiveness before mistakes were ever made. I folded it and placed it back. Some words don't need to be heard to be true. Later that evening, he noticed the papers spread across the table. "Planning something?" he asked. "Preparing," I replied. "For what?" "For whatever comes next." He smiled faintly. "I think I understand that now." At a family gathering months later, someone joked carelessly, "Parents become burdens eventually." The room went quiet. Before I could speak, my son did. Only if we forget who carried us first. No anger, no performance, just truth. That night, after everyone left, he sat beside me. "I used to think silence meant weakness," he said. "And now?" I asked. "And now I think it's strength I wasn't ready to understand." I nodded. Most people aren't. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because understanding is only the beginning. And consequences, when they arrive, don't ask for permission. Real consequences don't arrive with drama. They arrive quietly, like a realization you can't escape once it settles in your chest. The day my son lost his job, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse his luck or blame anyone else. He simply came home, placed his bag near the door, and sat down as if his body suddenly felt heavier than usual. "Then let me go," he said. I looked at him, not with shock, not with pity, with trust. "I'll figure it out," he added quickly, almost as if he needed to hear the words out loud. "I know you will," I replied. For the first time, he believed it. The days that followed were difficult. Rejections arrived faster than hope. Interviews ended without promises. Confidence, once automatic, now required effort. He woke up early every morning anyway, dressed properly anyway, sat at the table anyway. Failure didn't break him. It humbled him. One afternoon, I found him going through old boxes in the garage. He held up a photo of himself as a child, sitting on my shoulders, laughing without fear. "I forgot how much you carried," he said quietly. "I never forgot," I replied. He swallowed hard. "I don't want to become someone who forgets," he said. "You won't," I told him. "Not if you choose to remember." Time continued its slow work. He began learning again, not just professionally, but personally. He learned patience when answers didn't come. He learned restraint when frustration rose. He learned to sit with discomfort instead of passing it on to others. One night, he knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm scared," he admitted. Not of failing, but of becoming someone I don't respect. I considered his words carefully. "That fear," I said, "is a good sign." "Why?" "Because it means you're paying attention." He sat quietly, letting the truth settle. Weeks later, he was offered work again. Not glamorous, not easy, but honest. He accepted without hesitation. He didn't celebrate. He thanked me. "For not rescuing me," he said. "For letting me see myself." I smiled. Sometimes the hardest lesson is the one we're not saved from. Months passed, and something else changed too. The way he spoke to me, the way he listened, the way he introduced me to others. Not as someone he supported, but as someone he respected. At a small family gathering, someone joked casually, "Parents become burdens eventually." The words hung in the air. Before I could respond, my son did. "He never was," he said calmly. "We just didn't know how to see him." The room fell silent, not uncomfortable, reflective. Later that night, he sat beside me. "When I called you a burden," he said, his voice steady but heavy, "what I really meant was that I was afraid. Afraid of responsibility. Afraid of becoming irrelevant. Afraid of becoming you without understanding what it took to become you." I looked at him. "You don't become someone by dismissing them," I said. "You become them by listening." He nodded slowly. "I'm listening now." That was enough. I didn't reclaim my place by demanding respect. I reclaimed it by refusing to disappear. And my son didn't change because I argued or proved myself. He changed because silence gave him space to see. The day he called me a burden, he thought I would shrink. Instead, I stood still. And in that stillness, everything shifted. Because silence, when chosen with dignity, doesn't weaken you. It reveals you. It teaches without shouting. It corrects without cruelty. And sometimes it restores what words can never rebuild.